carbon footprint of products. It's a very important topic. It's something that really aligns with the theme of our pavilion, Pathways to 1.5, which focuses a lot on greenhouse gas reduction and also measurement, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gas emissions. So, from the climate registry standpoint, we do a lot of carbon footprint work. We have a carbon footprint registry that our members use in North America. And as that work becomes more sophisticated, we're starting to look ourselves beyond just the operational emissions and starting to get into specific products and processes for our members. So this is a really important topic for us as an organization. And here at COP, we have an opportunity to invite people here from international backgrounds, so from other countries that are doing this type of work and moving ahead on it and creating a learning opportunity for the work that we're doing. So I'll just mention who's on our panel here. So start with Belinda Mathers, from Chief Science and Advisory Officer at Toitū EnviroCare in New Zealand. We have Daniele Pernagati, Director of the Carbon Footprint Italy, and Andrew Kempson, General Manager of Global Climate Policy at Fonterra from New Zealand. So what we're going to do here is invite each of the panelists up to give a little background on their programs and how they're looking at the carbon footprints. We're going to start it off with Daniele to go into standards and explain more of the process from the Italian perspective.
The remote control is here, the slides. Should be already there. Okay, great. Thank you, Dan, for the presentation, for inviting me to have this short introduction to the carbon footprint of product. Starting from the experience of Carbon Footprint Italy, we are a program for the communication of the footprint of product and organization. And what is interesting, I think, is that all the information that are part of this registry are information that are verified by a third-party verification body under accreditation to ensure that the information is trustable and transparent. We have 4 different labels: carbon footprint of product, carbon footprint of organization. Then we have a carbon reduction and carbon neutrality that is in relation to the new standard ISO 14068 just published a few days ago. Okay, now I like to spend some more word about the standards because you have to listen a lot of numbers. Sorry for that, but this is the word of standard. And because our program has been developed following ISO 14026, that is the standard for the footprint communication, so defining the rules on how to establish a program. But the standard that we we accept in the program are mainly 2: 40067, standard for carbon footprint of product, 40064 part 1 for the organization, and then you see 40064 part 3 and 65 that are for the verification and accreditation, for the conformity assessment side. And the last standard just come in the family is 40068 on the carbon neutrality. But today, we spend some word more on the carbon footprint of product. I had the pleasure to lead the ISO working group that developed this standard a few years ago. So I may have a lot of history behind what is written in the standard, which kind of discussion we have in the past. But I like to underline which are the main aspects. So the standard is based on LCA, life cycle assessment. It means that the calculation, the quantification of the impact goes through all the life cycle, for the raw material extraction to the transportation, the production, the use phase, and the end of life. So you have a single number, or you have more components to be precise of this number, describing the impact of the product. And this is crucial, it's fundamental, because when you know this kind of detail of information, you may decide in which direction address your effort to reduce the impact. And this is key. I was the day before yesterday, in the ISO pavilion, we have this conversation on how to improve the comparability of carbon footprint of product. And we have several technical discussions, but one important point was to take in note that a lot of policymakers are pushing more in direction of carbon footprint of product. For example, in Germany, they are establishing a new regulation that will push more in direction of this quantification. And this is very interesting because if the government wants to give value to the carbon footprint, it means that this number will be part of the competition on the market. So you need to have reliable information. And the key word to give reliability of this information is PCR, Product Category Rules. Because you may imagine that 1 kilogram of beef or one telephone are different technical problems for the quantification. So one standard is not enough. You need to have a sectorial guidance to explain how you perform this kind of calculation. So we should spend a lot of time theoretically to describe all the technical details, but let me only give you 4 key words to explain what in CFP is, carbon footprint product is. So 4 steps: goal and scope, inventory analysis, impact assessment, and interpretation. Goal and scope means to define the boundary of the study. So 1 kilo of aluminum is different than a Tesla. 1 kilo of aluminum could be used for different purposes. So you need to use a cradle-to-gate approach because you don't know the final use of the aluminum. The Tesla, you know exactly which is the function of the product. So you need to have a cradle to grave, include all the activity. So this kind of discussion is part of the goal and scope. The inventory analysis means to collect all the data that is needed for further calculation. The impact assessment is to use the methodology, the emission factor, to quantify the numbers representing the impact of a single product. And interpretation means explaining the meaning of the numbers. Because you have a lot of numbers, but numbers is nothing without the explanation of what is behind. So to give the limitation, add value, etc. So I only want to give some more final information here, as I mentioned before, the importance of the product category rules, that is key word. And only to conclude about our program, we have a QR code for each product, because the product will have the possibility to use the logo, the label on the product directly, together with the QR code. And the QR code gives you the specific information you may find in our website, www.carbonfootprintitaly.it, and then describing which methodology, which PCR, who verified, which are the information, so all the details are available there. And then we have some number, and then I think I use all my 10 minutes, supposed then, for the initial introduction. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, this is working now. Thank you, Daniele. Okay, so we're going to go to Belinda now, who's going to give a little more detail on the program that she's working on in New Zealand.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Daniele, for the introduction to the standard. Excellent. So, talking a little bit about a New Zealand perspective, how we in New Zealand in our programs have turned all those ISO standards into some programs that enable New Zealand businesses and exporters to understand their footprint, to reduce it and become carbon neutral if they choose to. So we have a suite of programs that we offer to our clients. We do, like Carbon Footprint Italy, we have both organisation and product programs, but we've got the same suite of programs for each. So our Carbon Reduce program looks at understanding your footprint and committing to and achieving those commitments to reduce your footprint over time. For clients that want to go one step further, they can add an offset step, so they still have to make that reduction step, that's really important, but they can go to the net carbon zero aligned certification from there. And our most recent addition to the suite is our Climate Positive offering, where still measuring their footprint, still reducing their footprint over time, offsetting their footprint, but going further, going to be having a positive impact on the climate by either buying more carbon credits or supporting other things that are happening that may be somewhat less quantifiable around the climate impact, but that are doing good things. So an example of an impact project that one of our clients decided to contribute to as part of that was they were a skincare company. They were really struggling to remove palm oil completely from their product. So they made the decision to invest some money into an orangutan project, that was supporting orangutans. So that was an environmental improvement type project that they participated in. So this is a bit of a diagram outlining the process that clients go through for a product certification. So the specify step is the product category rule that Daniele was talking about. Once they've got that specification, that outline of what needs to be covered, then a model gets developed. And the model will vary depending on the product, of course. Then the client will enter their data each year into their model, see what the numbers are looking like, implement some projects to reduce, go through a verification process, and then may choose to offset. And then they go into an annual cycle there. Again, as Daniele touched on, we're looking at the full life cycle of the product. So everything from raw material extraction or raw material production, in the example of the primary sector, that's the potentially land use change, creating the farm from what it was in the first place, right through the manufacturing process, distribution, both upstream and downstream, the use phase, if there's emissions associated with using the product, and then that disposal and or recycling at end of life. So it's really broad. It's a lot of stuff to think about, and that's why it's really important to have that specification and that model. So just a bit of an outline of how an organisation footprint compares with a product footprint. The line across the middle, the arrow across the middle there, is a product footprint of a wine product in this example. So you've got your vineyard emissions, you've got the supply of grapes, what happens in the winery, your distribution, and then the refrigeration of the wine potentially, and recycling of the wine bottle at the end of the life. That's all covered in your product footprint. In an organisation, you may include a lot of that stuff as well, but you're also likely to be including things like business travel, like your head office electricity use. Those things aren't necessarily going to be covered in your product footprint. So there's similarities and differences, but also interesting colours in this version of it. As we move towards value chain footprinting of our products, an organisation footprint and a product footprint are starting to look much more similar. They're not quite the same, but you can see that your upstream raw material production, your freight, would be indirect Scope 3 emissions in your organisational footprint. Processing and distribution might have a bit of a mixture of Scope 1 and Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3, and then the use phase and end of life would be Scope 3 emissions in a value chain footprint as well. So there's a lot of similarities there. There are some differences around the type of emissions factors you use and some of those sorts of things. But that alignment's actually really useful. The other key difference is that your organisation footprint, you're pretty much looking at your total emissions for your organisation or the part of the organisation, whereas for a product footprint, you're looking at the emissions per widget, per bag or per bottle of milk or per bottle of wine. So that's much more intensity-based measurement as opposed to the total emissions over time. A couple of client examples before I hand over to Andrew to go into a little bit more detail on the work that they're doing. So Silver Fern Farms is a meat producer in New Zealand. And their purpose there is creating goodness from the farms the world needs. So they are participating in a number of our programs actually. We've got an Enviromark, our Enviromark program is an environmental management system program. Their organisation is Carbon Reduce, and a number of their products are net carbon zero. The footprint that they've done for their beef product, I think that one is, shows that 96% of their emissions are on farm. And so it's only 4% of the footprint that is actually the other stuff. So that can make it really hard to reduce, but it also gives some really good visibility and the opportunity for them as a business to think about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So I'm not going to talk to this, but just to give you a sense of the work that they've gone to come up with a roadmap that will take them in the direction that they need to go. So they joined our program in about 2018, I think. They're a founding member of our Climate Leaders Coalition, which really underlines their commitment to doing the right thing and to being a leader in this space. They've already achieved 20% emissions reduction in their processing, and they're partnering with their farmers, being the biggest contributor to their footprint, to see what can be done in that space as well. So they're involved in some research, they're involved in some pilots, and they're doing some good work there. And their 2030 goal is 42% reduction in their operational emissions for their organisation, to completely take coal out of their operations, and to be doing a lot more with their farms. So that's just a bit of a sense of what they do. They export into the US, amongst other markets, and have been working closely with us on several products now. I think we've got beef, we've got lamb, we've got venison, and the leather's just going through as well as a sort of co-product of what they do. I'm not sure whether some of you may have drunk a Steinlager from time to time. Steinlager's been with us since 2020 as a certified, they've got all their Steinlager products have been certified carbon zero. And the footprint that they did, it's a fairly complicated looking diagram on the left there, but what they found from it was that the glass packaging was their largest footprint, or largest contributor to their footprint. So out of that, that's driven them to have the business case to use lighter glass, which uses less glass, but it also reduces the weight that's being freighted around the world. So that has the benefit of some reductions in their freight emissions as well. And you can see here that it looks like huge reductions. Actually, it's not starting from a zero baseline, but you can see the first year they actually went up marginally. It takes a bit of time to implement some projects, but they're definitely on that downward trajectory for their footprint so far, by really looking at those core emission sources and making some changes where they can. So, a couple of exporter examples there just to give a bit of a sense of things. And I guess drivers, we've talked a bit about, or with our clients, about why do you do this thing? Is it just the right thing to do? Or do you want to save money? What is it? It tends to be a mixture of things, and I'm sure Andrew will talk about why they've gone down that track. But for some of our exporters, it's about access to markets. It's about actually, our customers demanded of us. There might be some legislative stuff coming in that's driving some requirements, as well as being the right thing to do, as well as potentially saving some money long term because you're increasing the efficiency of your business. So, quite a number of different drivers, and it's really, seems to be an increasing area of interest. So that's about it for me. I can hand the remote over to Andrew and get some user perspectives.
Thanks, Belinda. Thanks, Dan and Daniela. really insightful, great stuff. I'm going to provide a slightly different context. They're the experts in terms of numbers and footprinting and methods. I'm going to provide the context in terms of, as a business, why would you? Why would you consider doing this? What is the motivation? Why would I contract Belinda's organisation in terms of being a critical friend to assess our performance and to be able to understand why we're doing this? I can't even operate the clicker, obviously. Oh, and your colours were odd. Mine is really odd. So my apologies. Okay, maybe the monitor. Nobody knows. Gosh, just when you don't want your director in the audience too. So the grass is green, right? So let's start. So why would Fonterra undertake a certified product footprinting exercise? Right, and this is actually really quite fundamental. This is the motivation stuff that Belinda talked about. And this, in some respects, is about how Fonterra, and my apologies, I'll just give some context. Fonterra is a dairy cooperative in New Zealand, 9,000 farmers, world's largest dairy exporter, and we export 95% of the product that we produce. I'll come back to that because that's quite a topical point for later on. But fundamentally, we have a strong market pool. Our farmers respond to the markets. New Zealand, we do not have a subsidised agricultural sector. Our farmers live and die based upon their ability to service the markets that consume our products. And we've got an increasing array of really key, really strong strategic customers that are placing climate and climate ambition into their procurement decisions. And so that means, as a provider of high quality dairy ingredients to these customers, we need to think around how we align our service and our solution offering to what they're seeking. But in terms of doing that in the climate context, you really need to think about what is credible and what is authentic. In this space in particular, we have some very new, still largely getting road tested climate risk disclosure rules in New Zealand. We have the ability for judiciaries to have a very strong influence in terms of the credibility around your specific claims, and that means that we have to be really, really cognizant that when we're making specific claims, organisation and product level, that we can verify and validate it and back it up. And that's where the organisations and the services of the likes of Toitū become quite critical, because they are that critical friends. They are the authentic scorekeeper that keeps us honest, but also provides the assurance required for our customers. And that becomes strategically important when you think around the future of food. Certainly the procurement decisions based upon low carbon dairy ingredients means we need to be able to participate in these conversations as a good faith participant. Secondly, for us, in terms of that certified product footprint perspective, it's actually been able to convert our emissions to something that is relevant for our customers. We've done, I think the diagram that you had up earlier, we've done the organisational footprinting for quite a while now. Our scope 1, 2 and 3 footprinting. Brilliant, that's great. I think it's a really good start for businesses in terms of being able to understand their organisational responsibility. But when you think about a customer who is buying a dairy ingredient of us, can you naturally look at a scope 1, 2 and 3 inventory and understand the climate impact of the bespoke, unique product that you're purchasing? And they're not able to do that. And that's problematic when you're actually selling product. They want to say, well, what is this product and how many emissions are associated in production of that product? So for us, being able to go from that organisational view to a credible product view is highly important. What have we observed from footprinting? I guess we largely started this, put our little toe in there a couple of years ago, and it was alongside sort of thinking that this at this point was largely a bit niche and very much sort of some consumer lines and some key markets and key customers, and that's growing exponentially. And it's got to the level where it's no longer just a single line of fresh milk products via a single retailer into a single market. It's now a request from some of our largest customers. And we're at that point now where about 80% of our total product that we provide to customers is product footprinted. And it's happened really quickly. That's in the space of 4 years. We've gone from that butter to a specific market, fresh milk into a specific market, to now our dairy ingredients, and some of our really 9 key large dairy ingredient commodities are done at product footprinting level. And ultimately, that becomes really important for us, because when we think about it and think about the enabling of climate activity, it's how we respond to the market that return that value back to our farmers. Because fundamentally, when we think about climate ambition, as a dairy cooperative, and our footprint is very similar to the meat companies, 90% or thereabouts of our emissions are at farm level. So our ability to enact or undertake climate ambition starts with the farmers. And that's really, really important, because actually when we think about now change management at the farm level, we need to think about how we actually support and incentivise and reward and recognise our farmers to make those reductions that we need. So it becomes critically important in terms of being able to drive value from the market that we can then provide to our farmers to support that change. And last point here is kind of our perspective in terms of thinking about some of the carbon footprint in future state. And for us, we're seeing a very clear future where sustainability and trade will start going really hand in hand. These things are, the conversations aren't separate anymore. These conversations are really starting to combine. For New Zealand, we saw a free trade agreement with the EU ratified recently that had some embryonic, but some references in terms of climate performance, in terms of being able to maintain that degree of trade access. I touched upon earlier, that of the dairy ingredients and dairy products that Fonterra sells into the market, 95% of that is exported. So for us, we're acutely aware of the expectations or the challenges or the future risks in terms of making sure that we can maintain that market access and get product across borders. 95% is a lot of product for a very small country like New Zealand to consume. We need to be able to maintain that trade access. And this is where it comes back to the credibility and the authenticity of being able to make sure that your footprinting is done in a high quality way, in an authentic way, in a credible and transparent way, is how we go about making sure that those trade risks are well managed. I'm sure as the development of trade and sustainability come together, we'll have further clarity and further understanding in terms of what the actual requirements will be. But I think we can sort of say fairly comfortably that our climate performance, our footprint at potentially product, potentially organisational level, will become a key enabler for us to be able to maintain trade. So I hope that's given you a bit of a snapshot in terms of, as a client that undertakes that footprinting exercise, why you would do it and the things that we're thinking about in terms of that positioning to our future business. Thank you.
That was great information. Thank you all for presenting that, giving us a little background. So I've got a few questions here, just to kind of put all of these pieces together. We can just kind of have a little dialogue and dive into this a little bit more. One thing I want to understand a little bit more is how products sold in each market, when they're traded into other markets, how is that information carry beyond New Zealand, for example, or beyond Italy? And how do you have that comparability with this data? For example, Belinda, you showed that there's a certification that's recognized that Toitū offers. And Daniele showed that there's a QR code that can pull up details on the product. How does that export out to other markets? So us in California, if we're getting products that are produced elsewhere, how do we know that it's quality, that it's meeting a certain standard? Uh, Anyone? I'm sure you could all answer that. Who wants to start?
Is that working?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll make a start and others may well have something to add. So we're accredited internationally for what we do. So, and we put information about all of our certified organisations and products on our website. So anybody can go to that disclosure statement and understand what the numbers are, what the commitments are, those sorts of things. And what the logos mean. So that's one way we can do it. Individual products will go further than that and provide information. So maybe in your example, you could share a little bit about how you do that with your customers.
And it's still at a quite an embryonic stage, to be honest. I think for us right now, in terms of that credibility to be able to trade and to be able to sort of undertake that sort of business to business relationship, it actually comes down to, have you got the right ISO certification from the right certified provider is the thing that customers are kind of fundamentally looking at this stage. There are, I think, emerging opportunities in terms of data inventory transfer mechanisms and systems and processes that will enable the transfer of carbon as part of a product sale in the same way that the financial systems sort of transact financially. I don't think they're there yet, but certainly it's tracking in that way pretty quickly. It's looking at the technologies, like the blockchain type technologies, whereby you can have a very clear understanding from a traceability perspective the product and the carbon associated to that product. So right now it's more so about the right standard and the right standard certifier, but certainly the ability to sort of transact carbon in a transparent way is coming, and it won't be here it'll be here soon.
I believe there are two levels to guarantee, to give transparency and credibility to the carbon footprint of the product. One is the level of conformity assessment, and the other is the level of the program operator that we just described here. So the conformity assessment is based on a lot of standard rules I don't want to mention here, but in summary means that they guarantee that implementation, application of the rules is correct. But then there is the point, which are the rules. And the rules are based on the standard and the base of the additional rules of the programs. So in some way, this is the reason because we together are part of an alliance called Carbon Footprint International Alliance, because we want to exchange our rules, our experience, in order to give more guarantee possible on the market. Because the experience in New Zealand is well recognized in New Zealand, but maybe the logo of Toito is not recognized in Europe. So the idea is that if he do an activity, a very important exercise in New Zealand, he has the right, he has the need to have a recognition in European and US market. For this reason, the level of cooperation between program operators give a net value in terms of communication of result to the market.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful context. So another question I have is about the purpose of having this data available and where you go with that data once it is available and out in the market. So I understand it can inform consumer choices and people can select lower carbon products, but I'm thinking there's also probably an opportunity there for manufacturers to reduce the carbon intensity of the products that they're developing. Where does that begin? Is it the company that's marketing the product? Is it the manufacturer? There's a huge complex supply chain here. Where does those reductions really start to take place?
I think ultimately, certainly in a primary sector supply chain, and we saw some of the numbers before in terms of where the emissions occur in that supply chain. The reductions, or the reduction opportunity is an on-farm activity. Notwithstanding, there are still sort of opportunities in that sort of manufacturing, transportation, distribution opportunities as well. But what you're also kind of asking, I guess, is where in that sort of value chain does the right level of ambition come from as well, in terms of the establishment of what is an appropriate level of targeted reduction? Because having a number is useful. It's great. It's also quite valuable in terms of being able to benchmark our own performance against a business in Western Europe or a business in North America. But ultimately, it's also about the reduction ambition that we've got. So in some respects, the footprinting is an activity that supplements your own sort of climate ambition. So, for us, we have an SBTI aligned, target, scope 1, 2, and 3. And the role that the footprinting plays is effectively keeping the score, helping us with that scorekeeping in terms of performance against these climate ambition targets. Much the same as the customers that we provide dairy ingredients to. They've also got scope 1, 2, and 3 targets, and our value chain, our supply chain, is part of their scope 3 target. So they're equally as interested in terms of our performance, because that aggregates up into their ambition around reductions as well.
Yeah, describing all the complexity existing on the market is not easy, because it is in connection with the relation with who's selling, who's buying the product. No? But to try to summarize as much as possible, I think that the business to consumer, business to business description is very interesting, because in the business to consumer, you were described that is the consumer that make a choice on the base of a number. Maybe we're really at the beginning of this process, this moment, because the cultural awareness is not so high in the consumer, but it's moving. The example I mentioned before about the German government and the decision to push by 2025 to introduce this kind of tool is an example on how it's easy and how is important the comparability of the result even at the level of the consumer. But the other level, business to business, is also very important. And there, in this case, the meaning of the number is very important for the final product. I mean, I'm an automotive company, and she's my supplier. I ask her to give numbers, because her numbers becomes part of the numbers of my products. So, and he's another supplier. So I combine all the number of suppliers that are contributing to my final product. So in this case, the number is not for the final purpose, but it's to combine information together for my purpose as company.
Any thoughts on that, Belinda?
Yeah, I guess what was going through my mind as the others were talking was, in some ways, it'll vary. Like who's asking for the information will vary. In some cases, it'll be a manufacturer. Sometimes it'll be an end user. And the beauty of this sort of approach is that it doesn't matter really. You can pull together the information that's available in different stages of the process, and it all feeds into that end product that Daniele was talking about. So I think there's multiple answers and multiple drivers, but it comes down to the ability to make some really good procurement decisions with really good information.
Okay, thank you. It's been mentioned that in some jurisdictions there are regulations that are requiring this information increasingly. So on some level it exists that this has been done at a voluntary level, but we're starting to see more and more governments get involved. I assume it involves some rulemaking, some engagement to make sure that those rules are developed. What are your experiences with seeing those kind of rules develop in your jurisdictions?
I start this time, so we have done.
Yeah.
We are moving the first steps for sure. But at the same time, if we look in different perspective, we recognize there are a lot of clear indication on where the market will go in the future. Because, for example, we have now I mentioned the German experience, but it's only one. But we also have the CBAM. The CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is something that is creating the economic barrier on the base of the carbon content, the carbon embedded in the products. So it's not really carbon footprint, because there is a different way of calculating the emission in that case. But there's a clear signal that the content of carbon, the carbon embedded in the product, will count in the future. So now is the moment of the European Commission asking for the CBAM. in few years or few months will be in US or New Zealand. So we are in a moving world. Every year when we come to the COP, we discover a completely different scenario. New rules going always more in direction of the quantification of emission and reduction of the emission.
Yeah, it's definitely a developing area at the moment, and it can cause a bit of pain, I think, to exporting organisations to work out what the requirements are in different markets. But even where there aren't necessarily specific requirements, we're hearing a lot more about greenwashing requirements and all those sorts of things. So in New Zealand, we have Commerce Commission, and there's an equivalent, and I think everywhere in the world, basically saying that you can't make greenwash claims. You have to have something that underlines anything, any claims that you're making. So I think that's a sort of much broader type of requirement that's applying in most places and is driving this sort of improved robustness, improved integrity, and making real claims that you can stand behind.
Andrew,
Can I just ask a follow-up on that subject? Because it seems that you look at greenwashing.
we got a mic coming. Yeah.
There are, when you consider greenwashing, there are, under the indices, every country might have, or set of countries might have a different standard. So, therefore, we're comparing apples with oranges. So, when you have independent, let's call it audit agencies, or however you describe your entities, you might have one set of rules in one country and another set of rules in another. So, how do you transcend that when you're carbon footprinting, when the base, for example, might be different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks for that, Andy. And really, I think it comes down to using those internationally accepted and recognised standards, because if you're using those standards, people, the people that are implementing these things can either know what you're talking about, or they can look up and find out what you're talking about. If you're not using consistent standards across the board, then it could mean anything, and how would you know? And so I think that is part of the solution. There's work that needs to be done by probably everybody involved to educate the different markets and what things mean. But yeah, it's a developing area that we all, learning from at the moment.
I may compliment, because it's a very interesting question, I confirm. And not 2 years ago, but 2 days ago, we have discussion in ISO Pavilion. This morning, I have a discussion with high-level people in the ISO. And then we realized that we need to have more standards on the sectoral approach to give more consistency. Because the PCR in this moment are produced and realized by different program operator, and maybe, sometime a little bit different. But the idea to work together, to have a sectoral standard, is the only solution to ensure that the same result will be in the different, when you develop the CFP in different countries.
Thank you. That's the challenge, isn't it?
So one thing that I've observed with some of these requirements is that they will apply to certain types of products, right? It could be steel, raw goods, maybe dairy, or automobiles. Why is that exactly? What is it about those products that come under regulations? Is it that maybe perhaps there's more data available for those products, or they're sold in different markets? What is kind of determining what gets analyzed from a carbon footprint perspective?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure. It does vary in different markets. In the CBAM, European example, it's largely steel and aluminium and concrete and some of those sorts of things. Largely, yeah. Whereas we're seeing, I'm sure you've experienced going into North America. There's specific things around what goes on packaging and those sorts of things. So I think it just depends on in different markets what their drivers are and what people are asking for, sort of beyond that government.
But I think there are some drivers, because one is the consumers. And then the example of dairy products is quite clear because you have a clear targets on the consumer. We have experience in Italy, for example, where bigger retail company are decided to ask for the CFP of all product with their brand. So it's huge activity, huge commitment, asking the company to quantify and then reduce the emission in the future. So this is the indirect connection between the producer and the consumer. And the other one is the sector where they have a clear commitment to the markets. So if you see the automotive sector, all the big company, every company has a target for carbon reduction. The fashion company, fashion sector, they have the fashion charter. They have the same commitment of countries to be carbon neutral 2050 or net zero emission 2050 and to have maybe 50% reduction 2030. It's the same kind of the target, of European Union, for example. And this is an economical sector. So when you have this kind of sector, for sure, the supply of this sector will be pushed in this direction.
I mean, ultimately, at this stage, whilst regulation is coming, those markets, those lines, that's all been a voluntary initiative that's largely been based upon market pull. What is a consumer looking for? What do they need? So, and it shouldn't be a surprise, right? We've got different sectors, different products, different countries, all tracking at a different pace. But fundamentally, with it being voluntary, it's just merely a reflection of the pace of change and the maturity in some markets that are seeking this type of information.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Do you feel that in the work that you're doing, Andrew, there is the guidelines, the standards are, they're allowing you to do this analysis. Is there room for improvement, areas that could be more fleshed out?
There's always room for improvement, and we should never say that we're perfect and let's stop and let's not progress. So there is always room for improvement. I think we need to be able to sort of transact with a more high level of traceability up and down the value chain, down to for us now our supply chain down to an individual farm level. That provides certainly significant more traceability opportunities. Upstream for our customers and ultimately their consumers. Always got to balance that in terms of the complexity versus the benefit or the challenge as well. But ultimately there is scope for improvement. What's been really good though is it's highlighted places in our supply chain where improvement can be made, and it's not until you actually measure, understand properly your value chain, understand properly where opportunities can be made, where leakages happen, that we can actually look to address and sort of make changes. Ultimately, and it comes down to that that transition from that voluntary to as it becomes sort of regulatory, making sure that it's kind of a fair and transparent and an even playing field. For us, we look at impending sort of regulation or CBAM type instruments, and we're amongst one of the lowest carbon producers of dairy in the world on the basis of our pasture-based system, and we should be quite we shouldn't be fearful of these types of CBAM institutions given our footprint. However, if it's done in a way that maybe isn't fair or is done in a way that's a little bit nationalist in terms of its approach, then it becomes a market barrier in some respects, and that sort of works against the ultimate purpose, which is about making sure that we're really efficient in terms of use of resource.
Okay, I'll ask the same question of Daniele, Belinda. Any areas of improvement that you see, opportunities for improving the analysis or the approach?
I think what we're seeing the most is there's always a balance to be had between really detailed, high accuracy information and affordable, accessible opportunities for organisations. So it can be really challenging for an organisation that they might be quite a small business, they might be new into the space making something that's quite low carbon, but they can't afford to be going through a really expensive process. So we're looking quite actively at how do we find that middle ground of something that's robust enough, good enough, comparable, aligned with international best standards, but affordable and scalable and, achievable for everybody. So I think that's the balance to be had.
Okay.
Yes, I'm taking my note of the meeting of 2 days ago with ISO because UNIDO published a white paper on which are the area that is needed to be improved for the standard carbon footprint of product. And this area was containing, for example, more requirement for data, because data is very crucial. To have a primary data, not only to use data of database, for example, is crucial. Allocation rules. Allocation means that when you have the impact for the cattle of cow, you need to divide the impact for the milk, for the meat. So how you divide the impact is based on the allocation rules. This is another area where improvement is needed. The carbon capture and storage in some particular sector. The mass balance approach, sorry, it's a technician's approach, but it's an important aspect. The biogenic emission. So there are some technical issues. And the good news is that probably at the beginning of next year, we start the revision process of ISO 14067. So we have the opportunity to put all our experience after years of implementation of the standard on the table and to improve the document to have a more specific document for the future.
Great. That's exciting. So we're coming up close on time. We had a question already from the audience, but I just want to ask if anyone has a question they want to ask. Sure. We'll get a mic to you.
Yeah, today most of organizations and customers, potential customers, they are not interested in to know the carbon footprint because it's a way to clarify that they are making a negative impact. So how to deal with that issue?
Great question. So just to clarify, they may do an analysis, but they don't want to release that information because it might look like they're
it's
doing
like some customers can be afraid that they are responsible for a big impact. So maybe this is, this is an issue that they could not be very interested in make a carbon footprint calculation of the products because, I think some of them can believe that they are responsible for causing an impact, negative impact.
That's a challenge.
The ignorance is bliss type of attitude to things. Yeah, and I think that's real, isn't it? People are worried about, what they don't know and those sorts of things. But I think more and more we're moving towards the stage where people are trying to understand, because if they understand, then they can do something to balance those impacts or reduce those impacts. And I think something that I've been reflecting on over the last couple of days is, how do we talk about this stuff in a way that's more accessible to people outside COP, where we all understand, but not everybody does. And I think it's, for me, it's about, what do I want the world to look like in 2050 and 2100? And is this decision I'm making right now helping to go in that direction or hindering? And I think you don't know whether you're helping or hindering unless you've got that data that will underlie it.
Thank you for this question, and thank you because this question is coming here in the COP28. Because if I want to give a parallel, there may be some country that would avoid to show their emission because they will show that they have impact on the worldwide level, and this is really the topic of climate change. So and always more is changing the mentality, is changing the awareness, is changing the framework. If we have more mandatory requirements, if we're more pushing from the market, for sure the company need to follow the river. For example, in Europe, we have now, as I mentioned before, a target of reduction of 55% of the emission by 2030. It means a revolution. So if a company wants to stay, sit down and waiting what is happening, they may stay there, but they will sink, they will die. So and a manager has to understand how the market is evolving, how the framework is evolving, and then they need to understand that it is a driver for the competition in the future.
Not everybody leads. Not everybody is happy to follow. Some will follow kicking and screaming. Ultimately, in some respects, it's your view around the longevity of your business as well. For us, we believe that it was very clear in terms of this is what a modern business must do to be able to trade in this marketplace. But not everybody's there. In some respects, I know that it's not consistent across my sector. But we've got ourselves to a point where actually that's great. That's a market opportunity for us if somebody else wants to ignore it and put their heads in the sand. Because fundamentally, whether as a business or not, the market interest is there, the pull is there, the commercial opportunity is there. If you're afraid of dealing with your climate impact, then you're not going to have a long-term, resilient, intergenerational business. So, in some respects, it's about your view of the future. Do you want to trade just now, or do you want to invest to be there long term?
Yeah, and I imagine the more companies that do this sort of thing, the more that it creates pressure on others that are not. So as that grows, in order to get investment or folks to buy their product, the ones that are being transparent are going to have an edge in the market. So that's great. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? No? Okay. How about let's just go down the line here, and if you have any closing thoughts, anything that you want to leave with, opportunities, where do we go next with this? Where do you see as this growing, and how do you intend to be part of the solutions?
So we absolutely see that this is a growing space. More and more end consumers, but also the other manufacturers are really interested in understanding this and doing something about their footprint. So what we're trying to do is to make it more possible, make it feel easier, and just enable really good information in a really efficient way.
I want to underline that it's not only the climate that is changing, also the world is changing. And I started to follow the COP in 2006, and I remember that time there was a very low level of attention in my country in terms of business, citizen, low level of awareness, and then the things start to change. And now it's changed always more rapidly. So every year we come here, we meet together, and we underline a new situation, new evolution, new company, new strategy, new requirements. So everything is changing radically. And then we need to be part of this change and need to be in the front coach, not in the last in the train.
My only advice is it's not that hard, and it's not that scary, and it's not that difficult. In terms of excuses why you wouldn't, you're going to run out of them pretty quickly. It's just in some respects we know how to account for cash. Why can't we account for carbon?
That's a positive note to leave it on. Thank you. Give it up for our panelists. Thank you so much for being here.